we're talking about a new time travel adventure that we just found literally last night. We're talking about Synchronic, the brand new, not Netflix original starring Anthony Mackie and Jamie Dornan that involves time-traveling pills and could have more of a tie-in with Marvel than we originally thought. I'm Dom the movie nerd.
I'm Chris the TV nerd, and I hope you guys are ready to talk about the better version of Project Power.
All that and more, stay tuned. I mean, look, you said it, not me. Overall, I'm just glad that someone got it out of the way because, I mean, I saw the pills at first and I'm like, okay, did they do this intentionally? And then you told me that this wasn't a Netflix original and I did my double check. I'm like, okay, this is just the weirdest fucking coincidence of all time because I've been criticizing Netflix for a while now that they've got way too much of like similar things coming out at once. But like, what's your take on all that?
I mean, it makes sense, dude. It's the home of streaming for Limitless, both the movie and the TV show. They love their magic pills, man. I don't know.
They really do. They really, really do. In case you guys are wondering, as far as the references goes, we're talking about Synchronic, which is this movie that Chris found literally last night for us to watch, considering we had to do a little bit of a last-minute schedule change. And I hear that it's a Netflix original, and it's not from an auteur director, and I don't think it's unfair to say that I was a little skeptical going in, but I gotta say, after coming out of it, I was definitely more impressed and surprised than I was going in.
Yeah, well, hold on. It's not a Netflix original. It's just hosted on Netflix. They obviously bid on it and wanted it on their service, probably because with Anthony Mackie having all the hype in the world around him right now, obviously with the Falcon and Winter Soldier finale coming up this Friday night, that would make sense to me. And I think that's part of the reason why, even though this movie's been out for about 6 months, it's #1 on Netflix in its like first week on the platform, probably because everyone sees Anthony Mackie and they just can't get enough of him right now. So, but it's not specifically a Netflix original, but I do find it very coincidental that Netflix produced, obviously, their Netflix original Project Power. Of course, Netflix is the home to both the Limitless TV show and the movie, and so I think it's safe to say Netflix has something going on with a magic pill, but we have a whole segment about Netflix and the magic pill lined up.
We're going to get into that as far as that goes. I want to talk about this movie's release because I just looked at the movie's release, and this has one of the most insane release schedules I think I've ever had, in the sense of where, it actually has like a traditional release schedule. And that's probably why it feels so weird, because we're so used to like kind of non-traditional release schedules now after the year of COVID and everything. But we're going to kick this off, obviously, with our typical, our first initial thoughts as far as that goes, our spoiler-free review of this movie before we really break down the plot. But the plot of the basic plot of this movie, without getting into too much, is the fact that Anthony Mackie and everyone's favorite 50 Shades of Grey co-star Jamie Dornan portray paramedics who are investigating this series of strange and bizarre seeming accidental murders that involve like ancient weapons that seemingly are coming out of nowhere, that all seem to revolve around this strange new drug on the market called Synchronic. At the same time, Mackie discovers that he has been diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer, and as a result, ends up going on a journey in order to help find his partner's daughter when she disappears, as it involves this strange drug, Synchronic. So, Chris, I mean, you kind of found this literally off the cuff, and it was trending #1 on Netflix, and once you discovered that the plot revolves around pills, were you worried at all? Because we all know what your thoughts were on Project Power overall.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was worried because, I also really enjoyed Limitless, and like The Matrix is pretty heavily reliant on a choice involving some pills, and I love that movie. I just think the thing that worries me the most in this modern day is like what we've been speaking about specifically last week with the whole superhero sickness and people just having to make anything that's even remotely, fantasy, sci-fi, action thriller oriented revolve around these like figures that have like powers and stuff. So I was afraid we'd go down that direction, especially like considering Anthony Mackie had been Falcon by the time he was cast in this role for quite some time. And so I think my fear is that sci-fi and action storytelling is kind of losing its originality in that regard, and maybe being pushed or pigeonholed just only into these stories about people with like we were speaking about with the Nevers. Like, I don't consider them superheroes, although every article, every person you speak to who's watching that show currently, that's what they're saying it is. And I just think it's kind of like this subliminal thing that's happened to us. So that was my fear, was that it was going to sort of be a victim of the time it was produced and written in. It clearly wasn't. I thought it was not original, but at least it was not following the typical fare that we get nowadays with the whole taking the pill, and then like one guy turns in the fire and they're fighting down this hallway, and Jamie Foxx is beating everyone up and he's like afraid to take the pill, and it's like, because then he'll be a superhero. It's like, okay, cool. Like, it wasn't the most generic story, but so spoiler-free thoughts, right? I thought that this movie had as many good things about it as it did bad things, so I just went for a little while. But Dom, like, what's kind of your take on all that I just said before we start tackling the movie specifically?
Yeah, so going in, like, the opening shot immediately showed that, okay, no, this is not like another generic, like, Netflix schlock, right? Before we get into, like, kind of the, the differentiation between, obviously, this property and many other actual Netflix originals. Like, the way that the shot moves with following the characters, with what they're going through, I'm like, okay, even though it is very clearly low budget, this is made by people who actually know how to make films, which is not something I can say about a majority of the stuff that we get on Netflix. So already off the bat, I could say that it definitely got my attention overall. And Anthony Mackie's been having this really interesting career train lately, where ever since he got the Falcon role, he hasn't been like doing that thing that a lot of the other Marvel stars are doing, which is kind of using it as an excuse to like kind of, they get their Marvel paychecks so then they can go and do, whatever they want kind of on the side. He's really kind of been doing a lot of these like kind of off-kilter Netflix weird sci-fi products. I feel like he's had like 3 of those movies come out in the last year alone, and every time I see it, it's like, oh, yep, Anthony Mackie's in it, And so when I saw this, I immediately thought that it was going to be another one of these things, but obviously you can imagine my surprise when I see, I'm like, oh, no, this actually has a story, and this actually has something that it's trying to go for, whether it's the most clean, per se, and most straight up tight, no, I don't necessarily think that it does that, but these filmmakers obviously have got, before we get into the specifics with them, have had a lot of praise surrounding them, just based off of some of their initial installments. They've been making the rounds as far as festivals go. They've gotten praise from some of the best directors around, including Guillermo del Toro and Richard Linklater. So it's very clear to say that these guys have a knack for storytelling and that they're absolutely doing something right when it comes to their material. But as far as the movie itself goes, yeah, obviously, once I saw that the plot revolves around pills, I immediately go, oh no, not another one of these. But I will say that this is definitely the best case example of working with what you have within a low budget, because it's very clear that a majority of the money for this movie goes towards paying the 2 stars, because Mackie's at the level now where he can charge whatever he wants. And Jamie Dornan, right, for better or for worse, is the star of a franchise, probably the most problematic franchise ever. And it really sucks because I feel like that kind of like permanently tainted his track to becoming a superstar, because I do think he is a legitimately talented actor. But with all that being said, no, I enjoyed this. I very, very much enjoyed this. I got a lot more out of this than I thought. It was actually legitimately thrilling. It was legitimately engaging. Is this the best thing I've ever seen? No. But as far as grabbing my attention and actually getting me to pay attention to something that I probably never would have checked out for any other circumstance, I gotta say, I was impressed.
Yeah, same. I pretty much agree with the majority of that. And I will add further, it's one of those things where you're right. I think a lot of the budget does go to paying the stars. The CG actually was decent. Like I've seen.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
I've seen worse CG in like that Predator 2016 movie, and so I think that says something to sort of your sentiment about the carefulness of the filmmaking. I really enjoyed a lot of the shots. It gave you that sort of suspenseful thriller feel, but I felt there was actually a unique style in the approach to the way that this was filmed, and sort of the set dressings were very dark and ominous. I thought it all sort of went with the tone of the film. I liked the character of Steve. I really thought his journey was interesting. I didn't like that he left oh, never mind. Spoiler-free review.
Yeah, spoiler free.
Caught myself. There were some things he did that I didn't quite like and didn't quite agree with, but overall, I thought the character was developed. We understood his motives. He felt fleshed out because they're introducing a whole world here in like an hour and 38 minutes. So it's not like the longest movie ever. And I think they really did a good job of sort of getting you in, establishing what's going on, making it grip you, and pulling you through to the end. There are a bunch of silly things in this movie, man. Like it's. For better or for worse, it came and it went. I'm glad it's having a little moment now because I hadn't heard about it at all last year when it sort of first dropped. I know it did like the festival run when I was looking it up, but that's not really my scene. And really, they only come to me like the Minaris of the world when they thrive in the festival world. And clearly this one didn't. So I'm glad it's getting a little burst now because I wouldn't quite write it off, whereas I feel maybe a few critics or audiences have in the past. Like, I think it's worth the watch, and I think timing kind of thankfully allowed us to see this because of just, the way things move and all that. So I wouldn't write it off, but it's not perfect. It's just another time travel movie, but I think a slightly more interesting one than most that have come out recently. Emphasis on the recently there.
Yeah, we'll get into that more when we talk about the time travel aspect, but I did want to just talk about the release schedule and kind of just like how this ties into film festivals because I wouldn't at all consider myself to be a festival goer because it takes a very specific type of a person and film watcher to go to festivals overall, and it's just the fact of festival people, I think we can safe to say, are just have no interest in being invested in the mainstream. They just want to go to festivals and watch as many crazy new original movies that nobody has ever heard of and probably will never watch. So in that sense, I have to give them all the credit in the world, because that's the stuff that I just wish I could be doing with movies, because the marketing train has just made me so beyond sick of a majority of movies that end up being released now. But so this movie premiered at Toronto International Film Festival 2019, which is obviously famously where a ton of our favorite movies from late 2019 and some that even dropped during 2020 actually premiered overall. And it was picked up by this company called Wellgo USA, and it actually did have a 2020 release date. It was released in theaters in October of 2020, so obviously that would explain why nobody got a chance to watch it or hear of it last year. And then it was released on digital and video on demand on January 12th before finally being released on Netflix this past Friday. So, with all of that being said, do you want to talk about the pills of it all and actually start to get and break down some of these specific moments of this movie?
Sure, yeah. And before we jump into our next segment, I just want to let everyone else know what were your sort of spoiler-free thoughts. Don't ruin it for anyone, but let us know your initial thoughts if you saw this movie in the comments below. Be sure to like this video, hit the notification bell next to the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with our channel, but also know when we post videos. We post 7 days a week, so you don't want to miss it. We're going to be talking a bunch more about this film on the channel this week and so much coming up. So yeah, how about we jump into our first official topic of the day. I like to title it, I said, what's going on with Netflix and their magic pills? I thought that was pretty that was pretty funny because there seems to be something there. Netflix has a pill, a magic pill sort of thing.
They have a pill problem. And like you said, this isn't even a Netflix original. So imagine my confusion when I see that the plot for this revolves around pills. I'm like, what the hell? Yeah. What's going to happen in a couple months? What's the next? So first we got pills that can give superpowers. Then we got pills that can do time travel, And the shitty thing is that all of these movies seem to be building up to franchises that we kind of know are not going to happen because Netflix just has no interest at all in continuing anything. They're very much hitting the zeitgeist, which given the time period and given kind of people's attention spans, I can't really blame them for that, So I guess it's kind of what I want to get into is kind of the intricacies of this movie and kind of what the actual pills do. So basically the way that this works is that Mackie and Dornan they're going around to all these different murder sites, right? Murder accidental sites, right? A few of them seem to be just some basic drug overdoses, but then they seem to discover that certain of their victims spontaneously combusted out of nowhere. And basically what they come to learn is that this pill called Synchronic that they can ingest, as is explained today, I'll admit a kind of very forced exposition scene. I've made it clear before, I'm not a fan of characters that are literally only there to spit out exposition. But I mean, just given the very short amount of runtime, it's very clear that a character like this was necessary with that doctor character who comes out of nowhere and basically explains the entire plot to Mackie, which is that these pills, which is an experimental drug, what's it called? Crafted in a lab, obviously, a designer drug, that's the word that I'm looking for, basically uses these fumes from this specific red flower that comes from a very specific part of the world. Basically, the pill, rather than make it seem like your mind is traveling through time while your body remains stationary, the pill quite literally transports you to a different time period based on your location. Now, again, in a bigger movie that would probably have had a bigger budget and more time in order to flesh this out, they probably would have gotten into some of the more intricacies as like how each location specifically relates to where you're going to travel to and kind of what's it called? And like what the specifics of each person are as far as what will cause you to travel, and also like the only really specific thing that they can get into as far as what allows certain people to time travel versus what doesn't is that he basically and this is how it involves Mackie, which is that the pituitary gland, which becomes calcified and hardened once you become an adult, once you've like kind of reached your full maturity wise, while it is still growing and developing with you as a teenager, obviously, while you're the most susceptible to drugs, that is what allows you to come back after 7 minutes. But the older you get, obviously, it becomes easier for you to become trapped, obviously, in the past. And obviously, they break down the different rules as far as the different time travel. Like, if you touch a certain thing, it'll allow you to become solidified. You know, only solid matter can come back if it touches you and everything. But, like, I don't know, Chris. Like, what are your thoughts on that overall? Because it was a lot that was dropped, but it also felt like there could have been like so much more, you know. But again, like just because of stuff that was cut for time as far as the budget goes.
Yeah, well, I totally agree that doctor character had so much potential. I really actually enjoyed the actor in that role. He kind of played the part well, sort of the zany, crazy doctor who regrets what he did. And I think maybe that's one of the unfortunate circumstances of having such big name stars in such a sort of tiny production where you didn't really get to explore certain things the way that you might have wanted to. His character being one of those specific instances, whereas he definitely was just, hey, exposition man, here he is, zany doctor with crazy haircut who regrets what he did, quick 5-10 minutes in and out, bam, you're back to these crazy pills. And so yeah, the thing about the pills is it's a really cool premise. I actually thought the way that Anthony Mackie's character sort of went about sort of exploring, like, okay, if I sit here, it's going to bring me back to the Ice Age. If I sit here, it's going to bring me back to, this like tribal setting. I think it was like somewhere in Africa, and like he almost got killed by like an ancient like tribe or something. So it was very interesting. I actually thought that they did a good job in regards to exploring a few of the different scenarios. Like they even had a conquistador scenario where he comes into the middle of a swamp and the exact plot of land where he's sitting in, I think it was New Orleans area, Louisiana type area where his house was built on. Hundreds of years ago, there was a swamp and this conquistador was fighting an alligator. And it was interesting. It was cool because it's like one of those time travel films where, we're not talking about time travel too much. We're not getting bogged down with the rules. We're not getting bogged down with like, okay, if we do this, this is going to happen. So you have to be extra careful. Like it was a little more fun and free flowing, but also that's not to say that it wasn't structured and well thought out, because I thought it was really well thought out. And right. There was consequences to the actions, especially with how he only had a certain amount of those pills left. And so it's like very interesting because like while those are all compliments and things that I really enjoyed about the film, just something about it keeps it from being a great movie, whereas I thought it could have been a great movie. It was just like a really good, fun ride, but it's going to be quickly in one ear and out the other, for lack of better words. But what's your take on all that?
No, I agree with you because that's always seems to be Netflix's modus operandi, which is that if they're not willing to throw a blank check at a big name director, it's like pretty much just small limited budget in order to like get your name out there, in one ear out the other. Maybe you'll go on to do something else, And as far as the whole time travel aspect of it, I mean, we'll get into that in a little bit, but I mean, just the logistics of it, it's like, okay, I mean, obviously we've seen all different sorts of time travel aspects, most of them usually involving some type of machinery, and in this sense, you literally just pop a pill, and all of a sudden you're in a different time period. Like, come on, I need a little bit more of an explanation than just, I just got it. I just mixed it with this like essence from this red flower from this specific part of the world. Like which part of the world, even if they had just done like a quick scene that showed the doctor like traveling to that part of the world and showing that like, this is like one of those like pocketed sects of the world that not a lot of people know about that has this really weird mystical aura, and that has had a lot of people disappear. Like even in that sense, like this movie was missing the lore building, all the pieces were there as far as this like nailing the rules of time travel, but not getting too bogged down to the point where it ends up kind of ruining the movie. Compelling enough characters, compelling enough stakes that allow you to remain invested without thinking that it's too goofy. Overall, my grandma, who I'm actually staying with, came in about halfway through the movie, and she was a little bit confused at first, but when you had the sequence where it's Mackie quite literally sitting in front of a camera and explaining it, I mean, it's certainly an easy way to get across exposition to an audience that has the attention span of a goldfish, So that whole part I thought was really well handled, but like you said, those are the parts that are missing that prevent this from being a great movie and only make this like a fun, entertaining, in-the-moment ride that you're going to forget about 10 minutes later.
Right, because I actually thought that sequence with Mackie sort of filming himself and figuring it out was really well done. It was one of the better of those types of sequences that you need when you're in a new world that has rules and laws that apply with sort of the mysticism of it. You need those types of scenes, and I thought it was very well done. It was interesting. It was engaging. I thought it was artistic, right? Going back to those different periods of time. We saw the Mastodon in the Ice Age, and then he gets approached by someone who said was his age, looked just like him, but because of how harsh life was back then, he felt that he was probably 10 years younger than him, but looked 100 years older than him. And so that was really cool. Like, it did some awesome things. And then I actually thought, like, the whole beginning when he gets told he has the cancer, which is a rare sort of tumor on his pineal gland, and his pineal gland is soft, it never calcified. Like, that all was pretty interesting, but I guess it's a compliment to the movie that I'm going to say this. I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to get more invested. Like, I thought that there, especially in the third act, needed to be more of a journey recovering the best friend's daughter, Brianna. Like, I really wanted to go on a ride, and it felt like we had these really cool snapshots of each of the different places he traveled back to, and they were only about 4 or 5 minutes each. We never really left that initial setting. I'm sure a lot of that is budget. I'm sure a lot of that is time, and hey, look, I get it, man. It was a festival film that I think went farther than it ever could have imagined to have gone. But it just sucks because there's so much really cool here and intriguing. And, look, how many films have we seen where 7 minutes takes up a half hour? Like, we could have really explored that. I know with this whole pill, you have 7 minutes to go in and you have to get back to the part where you originally, so you're anchored because you can't go too far away from the original part where you time traveled from, because then you might not be able to get back. Point in case, the end of the film.
Right. Well, also for me, the most heartbreaking element of the movie when he has to when the dog gets left behind, which for me, I'm sorry, like him not almost coming back was sad at the end, but like that dog that almost broke me. I'm like, dude,
he left the dog with KKK people. I mean, that was like, oh man, that hurt. That was just for so many reasons.
That was depressing on so many different
levels. I was
levels.
just like, oh my God, poor dog. Like, I hope they at least take care of him. Like, that sucks, man. I would hate. He didn't have enough pills though. Like, he's a good dude. He wanted to go back.
That's what I mean.
He just, I mean, I get it. You got to save your niece.
Animals have more value than human beings. You can drop as many human beings as you want in a movie, but the minute an animal gets harmed, fuck it.
And so
done.
I was going to say, I think they did the emotional tie-ins of this film right. That's where I was going to go with it, like with the dog and with Brianna. But I just thought that because of the whole being anchored to a spot and the budget of the film, we didn't really get to explore each set of 7 minutes the way I would have wanted to. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of all I have left on the Netflix Magic Pill section.
You're totally right. You're totally right about that. And just my whole thing with it is that it's definitely a situation of where like the filmmakers probably had like this awesome idea that probably I wouldn't be surprised if it had like a ton more stuff involved that they would have wanted to flesh out if they had wanted to like maybe save this and maybe thought that it was going to be like picked up as like a series maybe. But it definitely like you said, it got picked up. It got way more attention than they probably ever thought that it would have, because again, these guys that we're going to talk about obviously in our next section are no slouches. Obviously, these guys have had 3 movies so far that have all hit tremendously well at festivals overall, that being Resolution in 2012, VHS Viral and Spring in 2014, and then this movie The Endless in 2017. So like these guys have been making the rounds as far as festivals go and doing everything that like first-time directors should do. And it's clearly paying off because as we're going to talk about in this next section, these guys are definitely going to be guys to look forward to. Like, this is not going to be the last time we're going to be talking about these guys.
True.
So before, of course, we jump into the next section, be sure, of course, to click the subscribe button, click the bell next to it, and let us know in the comments below if you've gotten a chance to watch Synchronic yet and what your thoughts are on it if you have overall. So, Chris, Of course, it's just inevitable. It's impossible. I mean, and it worked out timing-wise as far as that goes, right? We just got the Shang-Chi trailer that dropped, which I think looks awesome. But again, Marvel always makes great trailers. It's just impossible. We just can't escape it. As much as we try, we cannot fucking escape it because, as it turns out, when I was doing my research into it, it turns out that the directors of this movie, Justin Benson and his writing partner, Aaron Moorhead, are the guys that are directing Moon Knight next year for Marvel. So, talk about that, just in and of itself, what are your thoughts on, did I'm assuming you knew, nothing about that before I told you, right?
No, I knew absolutely nothing about that. I think it's awesome that they're a directorial team. That aren't brothers. I think that's pretty cool.
Right.
Side note, but yeah, no, it definitely bestows a lot of confidence in me, sort of seeing this character who in the MCU is kind of like a black sheep. He's a little bit odd, and he's sort of like a perfect Phase 4 character where they're sort of reaching deep into the bag and seeing what they can bring to the table that's going to be different and offer sort of a new, refreshing feel on the MCU. As they're not necessarily running out of big names, but they're going to make these smaller names like Moon Knight, who are great on the pages, sort of become stars on the big screen. And let's be honest, Moon Knight is not a star of the big screen yet. So I think because of all that, man, I think, the Moon Knight of it all is really, really reaffirming watching this film, because these guys, look, if there's one thing they know how to do, it's how to make an engaging movie. I think all of my criticisms are not nitpicks, but it's obvious when you know as much as we know about the industry, the way it works, the money behind it. They really did the best they could with what they had for this Synchronic project, and it's a really intriguing, sort of off-kilter, off-beat type story, Synchronic, and it's got this charm that sort of can somehow play to a lot of modern-day time travel and mainstream tastes, but also I'd say it did carve out its own unique little corner of this time travel world. This sort of, time travel movie fandom has been going on forever, and there's a lot of different, they even jab at Back to the Future at one point in Synchronic, which I thought was pretty funny. And I thought it was actually, as much as I love Back to the Future, I was like, great points, honestly. Really great points.
Really great points.
And so,
I mean, that's something that Corey is. I mean, as much as we dog on Corey for bringing this way too much into Double Toasted, at the very least, he is always right, which is that, unfortunately, time travel, for obvious reasons, would be horrifying for black people. Horrible. Horrifying.
Yeah, and exactly. They did a great job of offering so many different refreshing, not only just social takes on sort of the time travel franchise with all that Anthony Mackie has to go through traveling back in time, but just sort of different perspectives, which I think is something that's highly sought after right now. I mean, look at Shang-Chi just blowing up because it's finally something different. We're going to get some solid Asian lead role representation in the MCU, and dude, these guys handled these characters really well. They handled this situation well, and Moon Knight is such an oddball. I'm feeling positive about it. Dom, take it away, man. What's your take on the whole Moon Knight of it all?
Yeah, so Moon Knight is an interesting character because for the longest time, I always thought he was kind of just a Daredevil ripoff. Kind of, I'm like, what is this guy? He dresses like the moon. He worships an Egyptian god. What does this guy do? But I read some Ultimate Comics. Obviously, that's been my primary introduction to just a majority of the Marvel characters. That's kind of the sect of Marvel that I gravitate towards the most, obviously, just because of the inherent nature of it. And I gotta say, friggin', I really I'm gonna dig if these guys can bring their take to it overall, because just with certain of the filming techniques overall that they utilize in this, it feels like it lends itself kind of a lot to kind of the overall Daredevil nature that we really gravitated towards, as far as, because again, I still think that the Daredevil is the best thing that Netflix ended up doing, and kind of, with certain of the shot compositions, certain of the way that the action is filmed, obviously, I definitely think that these, and just again, with how engaging their story is, because the whole thing with the character of Mark Spector or the Moon Knight is the fact that he's, and obviously, again, he's kind of Marvel's take on Batman in that he's a millionaire entrepreneur. He's got a lot of wealth. He creates a lot of gadgets. But the whole thing is that he's actually got a multiple personality disorder. He's a former boxer, Marine, CIA operative, and mercenary. He was found near death, after being betrayed by his employer when they stumbled upon an archaeological dig. And as he lay dying, he was actually approached by the Egyptian moon god Khonsu, who offered him a second chance at life in exchange for being being his avatar on Earth. So basically, this guy, when he needs to power up, for lack of a better word, pun intended, he ends up channeling the spirit of this Egyptian god in order to kind of like become this alternative superhero. So it's almost like taking the best of everything that I really like about certain Marvel characters and properties and sort of channeling it all into like these filmmakers, like it within the nature. It feels like it aligns itself really well with the nature of these filmmakers and kind of what they go for. And again, like the fact that Oscar Isaac is playing this character, it definitely feels like Marvel is trying to give him a leg up, after he was done so dirty by Star Wars overall. Plus the obvious fact that he can only be in it for 6 episodes. It doesn't actually have to like commit to anything else if he doesn't want to, even though he probably will, because let's face it, that Disney money is way too good to turn down. But like, what's your take on the Moon Knight?
Yeah, no, for sure, man. I think let's just look at the facts here. This director has been praised by Guillermo del Toro, which, love him or hate him, he clearly makes very interesting stylized films that, yeah, that's what I said, Toro, that polarize and sort of capture the pop culture in the moment they're released. And so, love him or hate him, I think that these guys have garnered the respect of some pretty popular people. And let's just also think about the fact that he worked with some big stars in this film, and they really sort of, I think, meshed well with the roles, with the characters that they were cast for. Both of them, rather, because they're a directorial team. And so I feel confident in their ability as filmmakers off of this movie because, again, like, we established the world building, we got in and out, we had an enjoyable ride. It's just, I think, really what I'm going to equate it to, the reasons where this movie falls short, is I'm going to say it's got to be a lot of budget. It really has to be a lot of the budget. An indie film has to also factor their budget into the marketing and to all that stuff. So it's like they don't have like extra companies coming in like these studios do for each part of the process. They got a budget, they got to distribute it across the entirety of it. And so with that being said, man, having these guys have that endless, unlimited Marvel money with the character like Moon Knight, who I think kind of speaks to the Synchronic of it all, where this is a weird kind of off-kilter story. It's something we know, it's something familiar, it's Marvel, but then it's also like something we know, something familiar in Limitless and in Project Power with these pills that give gifts, but then these guys had like something different that they offered over here. So I'm hoping they do that with Moon Knight because the character is just so ripe for the picking when it comes to that. We'll see. We'll really see. But I'm going in fully confident off of watching just this one movie from these guys.
Me too. And like we keep saying, we know that obviously Marvel are incredible marketers, and we know that they are obviously way better at putting all their stuff into their trailers and their actual movie products and how their movie products can end up being generic. But like, even in the last couple of years, right, with their movies, we have gotten Black Panther and Captain Marvel in the same instance, obviously, besides the big team-up movies, as something as silly and little as Ant-Man and the Wasp. And they are seemingly continuing to diversify their plate, right? As we're getting Shang-Chi and Eternals this year, right? Before we dive into some of like the bigger genre fare this year. So that to me is still the stuff that I look forward to seeing the most from Marvel, is how they continue to change up, how they continue to diversify up the different types of talent that they can bring in order to continue to tackle these gigantic parts. Because again, whether we like it or hate it, at the very least, Marvel is still providing jobs in the industry, which is something that is in very, very short supply still, even in the post-COVID days, just because of like how streaming has shifted and kind of made a lot of things more disposable overall. So at the very least, just from a production behind the scenes standpoint, the fact that these guys can get a shot like this after making something this small that is seemingly like would not have gotten any attention otherwise in like any other sphere or any other year, but the fact that they can make something this small and then get onto something like Marvel, again, that just shows like that those are the elements of Marvel that I gravitate towards, right? So how somebody who we love on a sitcom that pretty much only people we know watch with Kim's Convenience can then go on to become the next Marvel superstar. That's the stuff that I really enjoy that Marvel does.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I guess the last sort of thing I have to offer in this whole topic is it's one of those sort of things where I think it's going to be interesting to see them apply this to a series. I think that the budget, it's going to be there. I think just everything that they weren't able to do with Synchronic, which was already a very fine film, it's going to be so heightened. And I really feel like these guys are going to be potentially household names because, look, guys, you know that I'm always bagging on Marvel, but it's just because I want them to do better. And so seeing this film and seeing the character that they were given and the choice that Marvel went with for the directors to take Moon Knight and sort of bring it to us, it seems like we're finally getting that sort of dare to be better, dare to try something different that I want a studio with that much power to employ. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. dare to actually try to be experimental overall, with their different stories. And I'm hoping that even if for whatever reason this doesn't go the way that we want, if anything, it gives these guys the springboard that they desperately need in order to go off and do their own. Because, like, another fun fact of, obviously, Marvel, that just, as far as some good that Marvel can provide, which is that Nia DaCosta, who is the director of the upcoming Candyman reboot, who has also been tapped to direct Captain Marvel 2, replacing Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, she's outward stated that that she was heavily in debt for student loans after coming out of film school, and then her getting the Marvel gig allowed her to repay her student loan debt. So, I mean,
in these times, man, you gotta love that.
If there's one thing that exactly. Like, everyone on the internet likes to pretend that money is the source of all evil, but, like, guess what? We still need it in order to pay bills. So, before we move on to our final segment, of course, let us know your thoughts on the Moon Knight of it all. Let us know if you're looking forward to Moon Knight, obviously, in comparison to some of the other Marvel TV shows and movie properties that were announced overall. Let us know if you guys think that these guys that did Synchronic, whether their style will lend itself well to the character of Moon Knight. So, Chris, let's talk about the time travel-ness of it all overall. Sure. So, it's safe to say we've watched a lot of time travel movies in the past, right? There's been all different sorts of time travel movies, right? Obviously, time travel was had a big part overall on your favorite TV show of all time, Lost. And I talked about this a lot, right? I've talked about how with time travel, right, and how with the specific rules of it, and how you can sometimes get kind of bogged down in it, and how they can sometimes, the rules end up trapping you in a sense of what creates the butterfly effect, right? But in my sense, right? Everyone is kind of familiar with that, and everyone kind of knows that with time travel stories, if you think about it a little bit too hard with breaking down every intricate plot and rule, everything starts to fall apart, right? But as far as I'm concerned, right, the time travel movies that work, it's either one of two things, right? It's either when you travel to the past, your actions in the past have effects on the future, or when you travel to the past, the two different timelines become dissociated through your action to travel to the past, so your actions in the past will have no effect on the future, but you still have created kind of this branch storyline, right? And obviously, I complained a lot about Avengers Endgame and how kind of like their time travel kind of had no effect on their future, right? Other than Thanos from the past coming to the future, right? But obviously, we're going to see how those repercussions come about in the Loki show, right? Obviously, with the displaced Loki. But I wanted your take on that because this kind of created a little bit of a new time travel aspect. So I wanted to get your take on just time travel stories in general before we kind of broke down the intricacies of it and how this kind of builds into almost like this new sort of time travel story that we're seeing pop up in recent years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do feel that this was a refreshing twist on sort of the time travel genre because I really enjoyed how we weren't worried about every single action we took. It was really about the mission of getting Brianna home. What am I going to do to get Brianna home? I know I don't have much time left to live, and these guys are my family. I really wasn't successful in finding my soulmate. That's what I was looking for. I couldn't find her, but that's fine because I found something beautiful in another way, and I have a lifelong best friend who I not only work with, who his daughter calls me an aunt, and that's like pretty much my kid. Like that's I feel how Steve, Anthony Mackie's character, felt. And again, this movie did such a good job of establishing that because I genuinely felt that in such a short amount of time. And so it knew its focus. Time travel was the backdrop to this sort of passionate story about a man who doesn't have much time left to live and who's going to do everything he can to make an impact on the world before he goes, or at least his small little family, help out, the people who found what he's been looking for. And it was really cool and beautiful in that regard. And so I liked how we weren't worried about, like, okay, if I talk to this guy and I give him fire, is that going to sort of change the way humanity goes? Because he literally gave someone fire. And I think any other time travel movie would be like, you can't interact with any of them because if you give them fire, it might set this reaction and then the whole world might be taken over by the Roman Empire and we might never exist. And like, it just gets so stupid so fast.
Butterfly effect of it all.
And so I really appreciated it for that, That's where I think it falls short in the time travelness of it all. The time travel is the backdrop, and so I don't know how the movie was marketed. I don't think it was marketed too heavily. So, I mean, I guess it's okay, but I don't know. What's sort of your take on all that?
Well, see, it's funny because we've talked a lot about Lost and kind of how certain seasons did time travel right and then certain seasons did time travel wrong. But I wanted to bring up, I think it's safe to say, your favorite episode or one of your favorite episodes of Lost, The Constant. The Constant and how that brought up the idea of the idea of time travel, not necessarily with your physical body, but with your consciousness, right? And your consciousness traveling through the different streams of the universe, right? Because the idea there is the fact that Desmond, for whatever reason, just because of, just his, being selected by whatever force is on the island or there, has been selected to kind of where his consciousness can travel back and forth between his present self and his past self, right? But the idea being that if you do that too much, then you become displaced to the point where one of your bodies ends up faltering, and you need what's called a constant in order to anchor you, right? And I could definitely tell that these guys are pulling a lot from that, because this is definitely kind of the most similar to that sort of time travel story that I've seen, where rather than him needing to invent this crazy machine with a car, or just a thing that he steps into, or like a portal, like a Stargate, or anything else like that, rather instead, and this is, again, the part that I wish that they dove in more into with those freaking pills. And, just a little bit. All you needed was not even a full 20 minutes, just 10 minutes. Just 10 extra minutes in order to explain this. How certain energies can allow kind of both your consciousness, but also through means of your physical body being displaced throughout time, but in a way that will not disrupt the flow of time, right? Because that also gets into the idea of, obviously, consciousness and how we perceive time, right? The human brain perceives time as being linear when in reality it's not, right? It's just a matter of how we perceive it based off of our aging process, based off of how our bodies develop in relation to the earth itself, right? I'm getting into some really hokey territory, but bear with me here because it does all, I think, matter overall. So in the sense of where, I think, and kind of how this plays into the movie thematically, right, is the idea that he's almost more of a specter in the sense, right, where he's displaced and he's more of a ghost, right? People can interact with him, but after a certain time, right, his consciousness and as a result his physical form and particles will come back to the present, right? That's kind of the whole thing. It's almost like, I think I've heard about this in other sense, right? It's like a magnetic pull almost, right? That I believe is what the role of the constant is supposed to be in Lost, is the idea that you need someone to anchor you so that you don't constantly keep shifting throughout, the timelines, obviously. Again, season 5 kind of came along and butchered that in Lost, if you want my honest opinion on that, but I still think that the idea, while it was introduced in Lost initially in season 4, was really, really fascinating and interesting, and that's the part that I wanted to see more of, right? And again, that's probably a thing that's only subjective to me, because like you said, if they start to get too specific, that's where it starts to fall apart plot wise, right? But that's the sense of where, as far as the movie showing, not telling, which few and far between enough as that was in this movie, I thought it was really fascinating how his specter form is kind of there, and they, of course, do the ambiguous ending of, oh, did he make it back or did he not? And they played around with that really well as far as if you have something that you can quite literally grab onto from the present that, is briefly flashing, right? That gets into more of the drug, the drug element, right, as far as the hallucination aspect, but, I don't know, I just dropped a lot as far as time travel stuff. I think I've, read way too much into this, way more than any regular human being should, but, what's your take on all that?
No, I think it's a great comparison. That's probably one of the charms that I feel about that episode and that era of Lost, the season 4 time frame and early season 5, is sort of how, while we had these crazy, I guess what some people would say, hokey, turn off the TV elements, especially to the audiences of that place and time, early 2000s, they didn't care too much about the rules. It was just about the storytelling. It was about the narrative, the characters sort of finding each other, and, Desmond and Penny ending up together. That was always more important than the rules and the laws and the whole, they had...
Right. At least until season 6 came.
Yeah, well, that's a different podcast for a different day. But yeah, I agree. And so it's one of those things where this movie did what I thought it kind of had to do to make an impact and not only stand out, but sort of work with what we were given, the world we were given, was really focus on the characters and just give them something interesting to operate in and out of. And so that's why I'm okay, it's not the deepest of sci-fi. It definitely was more of a thriller with a little sci-fi undertone, but sometimes that's nice, and I think they really pulled it off in this regard. Whereas Lost, to me, I honestly think is just a great drama that has these undertones of sci-fi and mystery, sure, fantasy even, if you will. But at the end of the day, we're really just following a love triangle around, and we're just, following these people who get to know each other because of the circumstance they're in. And so I feel similarities here with that movie. I definitely can agree with your point of possibly there might have been some inspiration there. I mean, that is one of the most highly touted episodes of Lost, so I wouldn't be surprised. But with all that being said, man, I think a lot of people who are deep sci-fi heads will have issues with this movie in that regard. You know, they might not feel like they got what they wanted out of it, but I would say you have so many other examples where you go that deep. But how many other examples do you have that are similar to like a Synchronic or like The Constant from The Lost? I don't know that many offhand, whereas I can name some of the ones that get more convoluted. If you, how much time do you have? You know what I mean? So
I know, but that's what I like about it though. Is I like that it's going in this different direction and kind of getting away from like we can only really have these two types of time travel stories that kind of like again just create a litany of plot holes no matter how you go about it. Like I love the time travel aspect that comes in at the end of the third Harry Potter movie, and that one gets away with it because that's more magic and fantasy based than sci-fi based. But even that one creates the endless loop problem of if they were there the whole time at the beginning, then how does that work as far as them? And like my brain automatically like splits in half with just trying to think about it. You know, I don't even get me started on the whole Tenet of it all, right? Where Tenet quite literally is based off the fact that of you not thinking too hard about it and just enjoying the visual spectacle of it, which is fine. That's Christopher Nolan's whole thing. But, like, at the same time, you could not tell me, even Christopher Nolan went out of his way to explain that, like, Tenet is not at all scientifically accurate in any way, shape, or form when it comes to it, right? And obviously, if you go based off of what Neil deGrasse Tyson will say, he'll tell you that just time travel in any way, shape, or form would just not be possible overall. But at least not unless you're near a black hole, in which case your molecules literally be split apart at the atomic level. But I do like how they're kind of taking these new directions with these stories and really making them more so emotionally based, because that's what makes this work, right? That's what makes the time travel work, is the fact that Mackie has this intense emotional struggle to go through, both internally, externally as far as finding his partner's daughter, and internally as far as dealing with his own impending morality, you know, with this cancer, obviously. That also serves as a curse and a blessing, as far as it's what's keeping his pineal gland young, which is what allows him to take the drugs and not be affected as seriously as, say, somebody older than him would be, you know? While at the same time allowing him to get rid of it so that it doesn't like affect like anybody else, you know, they get stuck with it. Because like I like the visual imagery at the beginning as far as showing like what some of these people are going through, as far as like the different experiences that they go through, I think it's really, really fascinating and really engaging and really trippy as far as that goes. And like that's the stuff that I'm really looking forward to, as far as kind of seeing what other artists can do with these types of stories and taking it and kind of rolling with it, you know, as far as like, okay, so this is what we got with this level, now what's next?
I agree,
you know?
and sort of my last sort of closing sentiment here before we start to wrap things up, and at least for me personally, I think that this movie, what it does right now, sort of having this second sort of zeitgeist moment after the festival circuit on Netflix, being the number one now for, I think, a few days straight, I think maybe it can do sort of what I've been hoping for in general from the industry. Is, I'm not saying I don't love these concepts that everyone loves, superheroes, time travel, action films. I'm just sick of the way that we can only see them one way. So hopefully maybe this can offer an alternative into sort of the thought process when writers go to approach and give us new sort of content around these types of stories. Because, you know, I'm a fan just like the rest of you guys, you know? I love my comics, I love my superheroes, but I just feel like I've read such a different diversity and eclecticism in regards to the scenarios and the journeys that these characters go through on the pages and on the screen. It's just so cut and dry, and we've been getting the same thing now for so long. So hopefully this could be one of those smaller dominoes that will help lead to the effect of sort of, hey, we got to reapproach the way we do sci-fi here, and you know, let's try something new, let's try something different. And you can have big names attached to these movies too. That's another solid thing. Yeah, it is possible. They're going to soak up most of your budget, but like it is possible, you know? It is possible. That's the beauty of filmmaking, is doing as much as you can with as little as humanly possible. So, with that being said, final thoughts. Synchronic was not a movie that I was ever planning on watching. Or real quick, before we get into our final thoughts, obviously, be sure to check us out and the rest of our stuff that we have going on at Talkin' TV Podcast. Click the subscribe button, click the like button, leave a comment in the section below, obviously, and continue to follow us on our social medias at Facebook and Instagram overall. That's what just helps us continue to get out our amazing content to the rest of you guys, the people. So, with that being said, my final thoughts. Synchronic was not a movie that I was expecting to watch or enjoy at all.
Literally, if not for the fact that you hadn't pointed it out to me last night, I probably wouldn't even know what it is. But I'm glad that I did, because, again, it gives me kind of something to look forward to. It gives me kind of a little bit of an edge before these directors ultimately get caught up in the Marvel of it all, and we end up covering them in our next Marvel stint, obviously, that we're going to be covering next year. And I definitely, again, while this is not a perfect movie, while this is not even something that I would call a great movie, it was definitely something that I definitely enjoyed and got a lot more out of than I was ever thinking. While certain of the time travel elements I don't think are as fleshed out as they possibly could be, I still think that the performances are good. I think the story is compelling enough, and I definitely think it is an engaging watch from start to finish. So I would definitely recommend you guys checking this out if you're looking for something different to watch in your kind of endless streaming habits. I'm giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, I think it's really great that we kind of got this off of our list now, so we have a little more depth to offer when we cover Moon Knight indefinitely next year. I really am going to appreciate that perspective for sure. And yeah, it wasn't great, but I really enjoyed my time with it. I think it was an educational watch in regards to sort of being able to really follow these guys and see where they go. I think if there's one thing we've learned about Marvel, it's that they're one of the biggest star-making machines in the world right now. So I'm almost positive that these guys will go on to do at least something else after their Moon Knight stint. So with that being said, I would recommend this as well. I think it's not going to be as deep of sci-fi as you probably want, but I think the drama and the narrative there is strong enough to justify the decision-making in regards to sort of their approach and the way they sort of distribute the different aspects and the elements of this movie. There are a lot that holds it back, but for the most part, it was an enjoyable watch. And so I'm going to go with 3 out of 5 stars. I would recommend watching this one.
Yes, most definitely. So, with that being said, if you haven't checked out Synchronic on Netflix, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Again, it's only an hour, 40 minutes. You guys could definitely set aside enough time in order to watch this. Again, get something new out of your typical movie watching habits. Overall, it's engaging, it's fun, it's enjoyable. So with that being said, once again, thank you guys for tuning into another episode of the Talkin' TV podcast. Make sure you follow us on all of our social medias, Facebook and Instagram at Talkin' TV or at Talkin' TV podcast. We've got so much coming up down the line. This week, we've got the finale of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And on Wednesday, we've got a special something for you guys. We are doing our Oscars draft. Myself, Professor Pat Huber, Brandon of Brando Critics, Sean of Math Teacher Movies, and newcomer to the channel, Lost in the Reel, will be breaking down and filling out our draft of the 10 best and the 10 worst Best Picture winners in history. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we hope you guys can tune in order to check it out. Some choices that you might agree with, some choices that you might not agree with, and also just to hear about some movies that you might not have heard of that, actually did deserve the top prize, as much as we love to criticize and bash the Academy for never seeming to make the right choice overall. So that's going to be on Wednesday. Overall, you guys are not going to want to miss the other amount of content that we've got coming up. And you're also not going to miss the amount of content that's coming up from this guy, my co-host on the right. Chris, where can the good people find you online?
Thanks, Tom. They can find me anywhere that matters, all the major social medias, at Christian Evanko, Evanko spelled Evanko. I make music, which you can find in the link in my bio. I'm working on new music, which is coming soon, so go follow the pages where my old music is to, get a little sort of idea of the timeline of things through the link in my bio. I also have another podcast called Talkin' with Andrew and Chris. Talkin' spelled the same way it is right here on this show, Talkin. It's a show about life, music, and everything in between. Again, available through that good old link in my bio. So I hope to see you guys there. Dom, what about you, man? Where can the people find you?
So I got to pull up my latest Facebook post because, as you guys probably have figured out by now, based on just how beet red my face is, I've been on vacation for a much, much needed vacation overall. And I think my latest sarcastic posts that I made, so I posted a thing about Christopher Lee the other day, and then when I posted the Shang-Chi trailer on my page this morning, I believe the subhead is, for all Kim's Convenience fans out there, our boy Simu is about to kick so much ass, so in all caps overall. And you can find that on my Facebook and Instagram pages at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, people, remember, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.